Hello there, it's your Hanish of Whiskey Lore. It's time for another whiskey tasting. And I'm jumping in and doing a tasting of a whiskey that I did a tasting of a long time ago. But that particular tasting, I was pairing it against another whiskey, which is how I really developed my nose and palate. And the reason I have switched from doing comparison videos to just doing one whiskey at a time is because I think once you get and accomplish your goal of really being able to start nosing and tasting and picking out different scents and flavors, that you got to get rid of the training wheels and you have to say, okay, now let me taste this in isolation and see if I can give this a fair shake. Because I think the drawback to doing the comparisons with each other is that if this whiskey is not that great and this whiskey is average, you may give the average whiskey a much higher mark because of how well it does versus the other whiskey. So I think eventually you got to get yourself to a point where you're stepping off of the training wheels and you're getting yourself into actually trusting your nose and palate, and you can pair them up again and if you're having trouble, but I think it's really good after a certain point to get in and do a nosing and tasting of things on their own. So there's going to be a lot of repeats coming up as I go through my cabinets and start pulling out some of these older whiskeys that I still have laying around. And this one is one that I gave very high marks to. I just did a tasting of this not too long ago, and I thought I got to re-review this one because my opinion has changed on it, and some of it is outside influence, and some of it is me awakening to things that probably should not be. And maybe this is going to end up being a little bit of a rant. I'll call it a Ralfy rant because Ralfy tends to rant here lately. But this is going to be my Ralfy rant. And he would agree with me, I think, wholeheartedly in that this color for a Scotch whiskey is shameful. If they can justify how this Scotch whiskey that is aged in some of the mildest climate in the world can somehow get that much color. It doesn't say that it uses color, it doesn't say that it doesn't use color, so I'm just going to assume that it does. The only way I can imagine that it could get this much color is if the sherry barrels that they age this in, because it spends 12 years in a ex-bourbon barrel, and then the last 3 years in a Oloroso sherry barrel, is it that barrel, when they put this whiskey in there, is wet. I mean, it just came from Jerez, and it is now ready for whiskey to be dumped in it before it's even had a chance to think about drying out. They may have even put it in a humidor, I don't know, something to keep this thing to where it just is not drying out. And so you could get that much color, because this has to be E158. There's no way you can get this. I've had bourbons this dark that I've gone, how the heck did it get it that dark? And this is 43% alcohol by volume. So this is not cask strength. Okay, so I don't know what's going on here. I have to say that of all the distilleries on Islay, probably my least favorite. I enjoyed the visit, but from a whiskey standpoint, probably my least favorite Islay whiskey is Bowmore, because to me, it's like there's not one. The 12 I really didn't get into. The 15, when I did the tour, I didn't really enjoy that much, although my opinion changed once I got home. The 18 I did like, but I don't necessarily want to spend a fortune to get the 18, and I feel like there needs to be some element here in the younger ages that really stands out. It makes me excited about going to get the 18 year. And so this one, when I did the initial tasting on it, I called it a raspberry bomb because that was the thing I walked away from this with. It was almost like raspberry Kool-Aid when you tasted it. Now, I don't know if something's happening with oxidization in the bottle, but now I tend to not, I still get the raspberry. It's very strong, but it's not as strong, and I'm getting a lot more of the barrel influence on this. So, in a way, maybe they are putting it in a very wet Oloroso sherry barrel. I don't know, but on the nose, you get a lot of dark fruit. I would probably put it at fig, maybe a little raisin coming in there. In fact, yeah, more of kind of like that sweet raisin coming in on the nose. Definitely has that full Oloroso sherry kind of a profile to the nose. Cheers. Interesting. The influence of that 12 years in a bourbon barrel comes out, because there's a little bit of that, like a hint of caramel that comes in there, just a very small hint. But it is dominated by the raspberry flavor and a grain note. There's a nice malty note that finishes the experience out. Little brininess and smoke lingers on the palate. So it is a nice whiskey. It is a nice whiskey. It's embarrassing the color on this thing. I don't know. At one point, I would have put this in the excellent category. I do think it's a very good whiskey, so I'm still putting it in the very good category. But, and that's personal, you'll have your own opinion, slightly thin, actually, on the palate, which surprises me, because 15 years in the barrel, you figure it's probably picking up a lot more body to it, but it really doesn't. There's a little smoke on the nose, too. Interesting. That is now coming through after nosing it, or after tasting it, sorry. Yeah, it's an interesting whiskey. It's a very interesting whiskey. It's very pungent in its presentation of those Oloroso sherry notes and that raspberry coming through. The smoke kind of hits you by surprise. It's like a matchstick smoke. It's still on the palate. It was on the nose after I went back, but I really didn't, the first time I tasted this, get all of that. I will also say this is definitely a whiskey to let sit for some time before you taste it, because I tasted it after pouring it straight out of the bottle, and I got a completely different experience. It was a bit more one-dimensional, and it's evolved a little bit the longer it sat in the glass. So very interesting, again, to go back, and I looked at my old notes to see what I was saying on it, and I didn't make any mention of the color. I probably did in the video about how dark that is, but you know, it's kind of the same thing, and you know, it may come from this, actually, a bias. When I saw Basil Hayden Dark Rye and how dark that is, and this is a Beam product also, it's like, are you kidding me? Really? Honestly? I mean, although when you taste Basil Hayden Dark Rye, it tastes like they just drowned it in wine. So, you know, again, it may just be heavy-handedness. I'm not sure exactly what it is. But there's either heavy-handedness going on or some E150A going on. One or the other. But still, it is a good whiskey. You know, this is... I say these things about Bowmore. I love the distillery tour. I root for them. I love the oldest warehouse, potentially, in Scotland. But it's just one of those things where I won't buy the 12. The 15, I felt, you know, some elevation in my opinion on. The 18, I remember being very good. I'm going to have to sooner or later bite the bullet and go out and get myself a bottle of it. I have a feeling, but, you know, it is what it is. A little grain on the nose, too. Very interesting, very interesting. So it seems to be opening up to me a little bit more. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. Hope I didn't scare you off my rant. My rants are mild versus Ralfy's rants. He can really get into it. I hope you enjoyed it, and give me a like if you did, and comments below. Have you had Bowmore? What do you think? What is your favorite Islay whiskey? What is your favorite whiskey there? What is your favorite Islay brand? Which distillery do you think makes the best whiskey coming out of Islay? Until next time, cheers and Slainte.